Now, I want to start by picking a fight with a very common, very human, and very understandable mistake. People look up at the sky. They see the staggering distances between stars. They read that the nearest galaxy is over 2 million light-years away, and they ask, with genuine bewilderment, why is all of that necessary? They feel, somewhere deep in the comfortable part of their brain, that the universe is showing off, that it built this colossal, mostly empty stage and then populated it with only a thin scattering of matter, just a few lonely rocks and burning balls of gas separated by distances so enormous they make your knees go weak. And sitting here on Earth, the whole arrangement looks, frankly, wasteful. It looks like whoever designed the kitchen built it the size of a continent just to boil one egg. I want to tell you that this feeling, as natural and as deeply human as it is completely wrong. Not approximately wrong. Not wrong in a poetic, debatable sense. Physically, mathematically, structurally wrong. The universe is not vast despite the fact that you exist. The universe is vast because you exist. These two things are not decorative coincidences sitting next to each other. They are locked together by the cold, unbreakable machinery of physics, and once you see that lock, once you feel the gears turning in your gut, you cannot unsee it. That is what I want to show you tonight. Let me give you an analogy, and I want you to sit with it, because it is going to do a lot of heavy lifting. Imagine a fully automated chemical factory, not a building. A factory the size of a continent, say the entire landmass of North America, filled wall to wall and floor to ceiling with pipes and pressurized chambers and vats and catalysts and heat exchangers, all running continuously in complete darkness. No workers, no lights, just machinery, cycling and reacting and processing, silently, for 10,000 years. At the end of those 10,000 years, deep inside this enormous mechanical infrastructure, one tiny, microscopic drop of a vital medicine condenses out of the system. A single drop, that is all. One drop in 10,000 years of continental-scale industrial activity. Now, imagine a very small person who lives inside that drop. This tiny person looks around and says, "Look at this absurd factory. It is a continent wide, and it ran for 10,000 years just to make me." That seems like an obscene waste of resources. It seems like a design failure. Why could the factory not just be, say, the size of a room? Why did it have to run for 10,000 years instead of, say, 5 minutes? The answer, of course, is that the chemistry does not care what the small person finds comfortable. The chemistry dictates that you cannot perform the required reactions at smaller scales or in shorter times. The molecular processes have a pace and a physical geometry, and they are not negotiable. You want the drop. You pay the price of the continent and the 10,000 years. There is no discount. There is no shortcut. The factory is not wasteful. The factory is the minimum required budget to produce that drop. The universe is that factory. You are that drop. And I am going to show you why the factory has to be this large. Start at the very beginning, which is, in this case, roughly 13.8 billion years ago. The universe, immediately after the event we call the Big Bang, was a searingly hot, almost perfectly uniform fog of the two simplest elements, hydrogen and helium. That is it. Mostly hydrogen. A little helium, trace amounts of lithium, nothing else. Nothing remotely interesting to biology. You cannot build a cell out of hydrogen. You cannot build a nervous system out of helium. You cannot build a protein, a lipid, a strand of nucleic acid, a synapse, a thought, out of the material that the early universe provided. The early universe had all the raw potential of a warehouse containing only sand and air. To get the atoms that biology requires, carbon and oxygen and nitrogen and iron and phosphorus and calcium, you need a foundry. And the only foundry that the laws of physics provide at this scale is the interior of a massive star. Inside the core of a star, gravity crushes hydrogen nuclei together under pressures and temperatures that force nuclear fusion. The star is, at its heart, a nuclear reactor of staggering power. Hydrogen fuses into helium, helium fuses into carbon, carbon fuses onward into oxygen, neon, silicon, sulfur. And in the most massive stars, the heaviest elements, iron and cobalt and nickel, are forged in the final, furious moments before the star tears itself apart in a supernova explosion. The supernova is not a catastrophe. The supernova is the delivery mechanism. It is the moment when the star opens its vaults and hurls its manufactured elements into the surrounding space, seeding the interstellar medium with the raw ingredients for future planets and, eventually, future chemistry and eventually, future life. But here is the part that nobody tells you when they describe this process, because they are usually in a hurry to get to the beautiful part, and they skip right past the brutally important machinery underneath. This process is not fast. It is not remotely fast. The universe has to wait billions of years for the first generation of massive stars to form, burn through their fuel, and explode. Then it has to wait for the expelled material to cool and condense and be swept up into new nebulae. Then it has to wait for second and third generation stars to form, incorporating the new heavier elements, and for some of those stars to have planet-forming disks around them, and for those planets to cool, and for the surface chemistry to begin, and for self-replicating molecular systems to emerge, and for those systems to stumble through billions of years of evolution before something sits up and starts asking questions about the universe. The total bill, from hydrogen fog to curious observer, is roughly 10 billion years at minimum. That is not an estimate with much slack in it. That is the clock dictated by stellar physics and planetary geology and the pace of biological evolution. You cannot rush it any more than you can rush the chemical factory. Now here is where the size comes from. Here is where the factory becomes a continent. While the universe was busy spending all those billions of years cooking elements inside stars, it was not sitting still. Space itself was expanding. Every point in space was moving away from every other point, not because matter was flying through a pre-existing void, but because the fabric of spacetime itself was stretching, and it was stretching at an enormous rate. The universe that is 13.8 billion years old is, as a direct mathematical result of that expansion, approximately 93 billion light-years across in its observable extent. These two facts, the billions of years required for stellar nucleosynthesis and the billions of light-years of spatial extent, are not two separate phenomena that happen to occur simultaneously. They are the same phenomenon. The age and the size are locked together by the expansion of space. A universe that is old enough to have cooked carbon inside stars is, by the inescapable mathematics of cosmological expansion, enormous. You cannot have a young, small universe that contains complex chemistry. The size is the shadow cast by the age. The age is the shadow cast by the requirements of stellar nucleosynthesis. The requirements of stellar nucleosynthesis are the shadow cast by the need for carbon, and carbon is the shadow cast by you. Now, I want to go in the other direction for a moment because I think there is a perfectly beautiful and deeply unsettling way to understand cosmic scale by looking not outward but inward. Not at the universe around us, but at the material we are made of. Consider what an atom actually is. Not the tidy little diagram with circles orbiting a central ball, which is a useful fiction but bears almost no resemblance to physical reality. A real atom is a study in almost pure emptiness. The nucleus, containing virtually all of the atom's mass, is so small relative to the total volume of the atom that any comparison you make is going to sound absurd, but I will try. If you take a single hydrogen atom and you enlarge it until the nucleus is the size of a marble, about 1 centimeter across, the electron orbits at a distance of roughly 1 kilometer. 1 kilometer from the marble. The space between them is not filled with anything. It is not filled with a medium or a fluid or a substrate. It is, as far as we can measure, simply nothing. The atom is 99.9999999999996% empty space by volume. I am not being dramatic. That is the number. Think about what that means for every physical object you have ever touched. The table under your hands, the floor beneath your feet, your own hands. The substance we call solid matter is not solid in any meaningful sense. It is a sparse archipelago of unimaginably small nuclei surrounded by vast, howling voids, with electrons orbiting at proportional distances that make the solar system look crowded. The reason solid matter feels solid is not because there is any actual substance packed together. It is because the electromagnetic forces between atoms prevent them from interpenetrating. You are not resting on a solid floor. You are suspended above a void by the repulsion of electron fields. The consequence of this is striking. If you could remove all of the empty space from all of the atoms in every human being currently alive on this planet, all 8 billion of us, you would compress the total remaining nuclear material into a volume roughly the size of a small sugar cube. A sugar cube that weighs 5 billion metric tons, granted. But a sugar cube, every human who has ever lived, every ambition and grief and theorem and song and love and war, the entire biological record of our species, collapses to something you could lose in a sofa cushion. This interior vastness is not unrelated to the exterior vastness. They share the same origin. The empty space inside atoms reflects the quantum mechanical nature of matter, which governs how particles behave, which determines the rates of nuclear reactions inside stars, which sets the pace of stellar evolution, which controls the timescale of nucleosynthesis, which dictates how long the universe must run before life can emerge. The void inside your body and the void between galaxies are speaking the same language. They are both expressions of the same underlying physics, manifesting at wildly different scales. The universe is not vast despite being made of mostly empty space. It is vast partly because it is made of mostly empty space, because the physics that generates that interior emptiness also governs the nuclear furnaces that determine the cosmic clock. Now I want to talk about something that strikes me as one of the most consequential and permanently humbling facts in all of physics. It concerns what the size of the universe means for any possible communication or interaction between the things inside it. Light travels at approximately 300,000 kilometers per second. This is, as far as we know, the absolute speed limit of the universe. Nothing carrying information can exceed it. This is not a technological limitation waiting to be engineered around. It is not a rule that applies only under certain conditions. It is a fundamental feature of the structure of spacetime. The speed of light is baked into the geometry of the universe, at the deepest level we know how to probe. Now, the nearest star to our Sun is Alpha Centauri, approximately 4.2 light-years away. A signal traveling at the speed of light takes 4.2 years to get there, and 4.2 years to return. A conversation with anyone at Alpha Centauri would have a minimum round-trip delay of 8.4 years per exchange. Not because of bad technology, because of the physical structure of space. The Andromeda Galaxy, our nearest large galactic neighbor, is 2.5 million light-years away. The light you see when you look at Andromeda on a clear night left its source 2.5 million years ago, when our ancestors were early hominids making stone tools. You are not seeing Andromeda. You are seeing a 5 million year old photograph of Andromeda. The actual current state of Andromeda is completely inaccessible to you. It is causally disconnected from you in this moment. Whatever is happening there right now, you will not know about it for 2.5 million years. And Andromeda is our neighbor. In cosmic terms, it is practically next door. The observable universe extends to about 46 billion light-years in every direction. Beyond a certain distance, space is expanding so rapidly that light emitted from those regions can never reach us, even traveling at its maximum speed. There is an edge, not a wall in space, but a horizon defined by the expansion rate, beyond which the universe is permanently invisible and permanently inaccessible. We are sealed inside a bubble of knowable space. What lies outside our cosmic horizon is not something we can ever observe, contact, or influence. It is physically cut off from us with the same finality as a region on the other side of a black hole's event horizon. What this means for life is something I find both deeply clarifying and quietly devastating. Every civilization that has ever arisen, or will ever arise in the universe, has arisen inside its own cosmic horizon bubble. The distances between star systems, let alone between galaxies, are so enormous, and the speed limit of light so firm that independent civilizations are, for all practical purposes, permanently isolated from one another. The vast majority of stars that will ever host planets capable of supporting life are separated from one another by distances that make meaningful interaction essentially impossible on biological timescales. A civilization on a planet 10,000 light-years from here could, in principle, send us a signal. But any response we send takes 10,000 years to arrive, and any reply to that takes 10,000 more. The conversation, stretched over geological time, is not a conversation in any sense that a living being can participate in. A species evolves, develops technology, transmits signals, and likely undergoes radical change or extinction across timescales comparable to the light travel time to its neighbors. The size of the universe does not merely make space travel difficult, it imposes a kind of permanent biological quarantine on all life within it. Stars and their civilizations are islands in a sea so wide that the crossing time exceeds the lifespan of the travelers and, often, the lifespan of the civilizations themselves. We can see the light from distant galaxies. We can measure the spectra of stars and infer the composition of their atmospheres and their temperatures and their ages. But we are watching a record from the past. We are archaeologists of light, studying a universe that existed thousands or millions or billions of years before the signal reached our instruments. The cosmos we can see is a ghost of the cosmos that exists. This is not a design failure. This is not the universe being cruel or indifferent in some whimsical or personal sense. The same expansion that spread matter across these vast separations is the expansion that gave the universe the volume needed to cool from its initial searing temperature to one compatible with stable atoms and stable chemistry. The same light speed limit that enforces cosmic isolation is the same constant that governs the electromagnetic interactions inside every atom that makes up your body. The quarantine and the chemistry share the same physical constants. You cannot have one without the other. What I want you to take from this, and I want you to feel it rather than just recite it back, is that the universe is not big because something went wrong or because something is showing off. The universe is big because the physical laws that permit carbon-based chemistry, stellar nucleosynthesis, planetary formation, and biological evolution require a minimum budget of space and time that happens to be staggering by any human standard of comparison. The cosmic machinery required to assemble the atoms in your left hand alone, the stellar generations that had to form and burn and explode to produce those carbon and oxygen and calcium nuclei, the expansion of spacetime that spread the raw material across the necessary volume, the billions of years of planetary geochemistry that organized those atoms into self-replicating molecules. This is not background noise. This is the cost. This is the infrastructure that had to be paid for before a single neuron could fire in a single brain on a single pale dot orbiting a single middle-aged star. The factory is not wasteful. You just have to understand what it was built to produce. I think the most honest and the most physically satisfying response to the size of the universe is not awe in the religious sense, not the impulse to kneel or to feel small in a way that ends the inquiry. It is something more like the feeling you get when you finally understand a very long, very difficult proof, when all the steps that seemed arbitrary and excessive suddenly reveal themselves as necessary, one by one, and you see that there was no fat in the argument, that every line was load-bearing, and the conclusion could not have been reached by a shorter route. That is the universe. Every light year of separation between galaxies is a line in the proof. Every billion years of stellar evolution is a step in the derivation. The conclusion of the proof is you, sitting here, able to ask why the proof is so long. The length of the proof is the answer to the question.